Why did one engine failure seal this flight's fate? That's the question haunting investigators, aviation experts, and everyone following the tragic crash that claimed the lives of NASCAR legend Greg Biffle and two others on a cold January morning in North Carolina. Twin engine jets are specifically designed to fly safely on one engine. Pilots train extensively for engine failures. The Cessna Citation, too, has decades of proven reliability. So why, when one engine apparently failed, did this flight end in catastrophe less than 10 minutes after takeoff? The answer isn't simple, and it isn't just about the engine. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going deep into the Greg Biffle Citation disaster, examining why a failure that should have been survivable became fatal, and uncovering the cascade of factors that turned a manageable emergency into an unsurvivable situation. Before we dive into the specifics of this accident, I need you to understand a fundamental principle of aviation safety. Aircraft don't crash because of single failures. Modern aircraft, especially certified transport category jets like the Citation, are designed with redundancy built into every critical system. Two engines, multiple hydraulic systems, backup electrical systems, redundant flight controls. The entire philosophy of aircraft design is that no single failure should result in loss of the aircraft. So when a modern jet does crash, it's almost never because of just one thing going wrong. It's because multiple things went wrong simultaneously, or because a single failure was compounded by other factors that prevented the crew from managing it successfully. The Cessna Citation. Two involved in this accident, tail number November 257 Bravo Whiskey, is what's called a twin-engine jet. It has two Pratt & Whitney turbofan engines, one mounted on each side of the rear fuselage. Each engine produces approximately 2,500 pounds of thrust. Under normal operations with both engines running, the Citation II has excellent performance. It can climb at over 2,000 feet per minute. It can cruise at altitudes above 40,000 feet. It can fly over 1,000 nautical miles. But the aircraft is also certificated for single-engine operations. That means if one engine fails completely, the other engine alone provides sufficient thrust to maintain controlled flight, to climb slowly, and to return to an airport for landing. This isn't just theoretical, it's demonstrated during the aircraft certification process, and pilots must demonstrate single-engine proficiency during their type rating check ride. The ability to fly on one engine is a fundamental safety feature of all multi-engine aircraft. However, and this is critical, single-engine performance is significantly degraded compared to two-engine performance. Your maximum climb rate might be reduced from 2,000 feet per minute to perhaps 500 or even less, depending on weight, altitude, and temperature. Your maximum altitude capability is reduced, your fuel consumption increases, your speed is reduced, and perhaps most importantly, your workload increases dramatically because now you're managing an emergency, running checklists, troubleshooting systems, all while hand-flying the aircraft with asymmetric thrust. Asymmetric thrust is what happens when one engine is producing power and the other isn't. The working engine creates thrust on one side of the aircraft, which creates a yawing moment, a turning force. The aircraft wants to turn toward the dead engine. Pilots must counteract this with rudder pressure, holding the rudder pedal deflected to keep the aircraft flying straight. This requires constant physical effort and constant attention. You can't just trim it out and relax. You have to actively fly the aircraft every moment. On the morning of January, whatever the date was, the Citation departed Statesville Regional Airport, a small public airport about 30 miles north of Charlotte, North Carolina. The weather was legal for visual flight rules, but marginal. Cloud ceilings were reported at approximately 1,200 feet broken. Visibility was around 5 statute miles in light drizzle. Temperature and dew point were close together, creating moisture in the air, reducing visibility, making the clouds lower and more widespread. These are the kinds of conditions where VFR is legal, but IMC instrument meteorological conditions are very close. You're operating right on the edge. The aircraft departed runway 10 at approximately 10:05 local time. From the limited flight tracking data available, the initial climb appeared normal. The aircraft lifted off, gear came up, flaps retracted, began climbing out on the departure path. For the first couple of minutes, everything looked routine. But then something changed. The aircraft leveled off at approximately 2,000 feet, much lower than you would expect for a Departure climb, airspeed began to decrease. The aircraft began a gradual descent. This is the profile of a crew recognizing a problem and responding to it. They stopped the climb. They reduced power. They began maneuvering back toward the airport. From the limited ADS-B tracking data we have, it appears the aircraft turned, possibly attempting to make a tight pattern back to land on runway 28, the opposite direction from their departure. They were trying to get back on the ground as quickly as possible. Now here's where the physical evidence starts to tell us what may have happened. Multiple aviation analysts examining post-crash photographs have noted two significant details. First, the right-hand forward baggage compartment door appears to be missing from the wreckage. Second, the right-hand engine, the number 2 engine, shows visible and significant damage to the fan blades of the compressor section. Those two observations together paint a very specific picture, and it's a picture we've seen before. In 2024, a Cessna Citation 2 departing Barranquilla, Colombia, experienced an opening of the right-hand nose baggage door during the initial climb. The door, unsecured and unlatched, was blown open by the airflow and pressure differential as the aircraft accelerated and climbed. Items stored in the baggage compartment, suitcases, bags, loose articles, were immediately sucked out of the compartment by the tremendous airflow, and because of the location of that baggage door, directly ahead and slightly below the right-hand engine intake, several of those items were ingested directly into the number 2 engine. When foreign objects enter a jet engine at high speed, the results are catastrophic for the engine. The fan blades, spinning at thousands of RPM, strike the objects. Blades bend, break, shatter. Pieces of destroyed blades are thrown forward and backward through the engine, causing secondary damage to compressor stages, to the combustion section, to turbine blades. Within seconds, a perfectly functioning engine becomes a destroyed, non-functional piece of wreckage. In the Barranquilla incident, the number 2 engine failed completely. The crew declared an emergency, ran the engine failure checklist, and returned to land safely on the number 1 engine. But why didn't the same successful outcome occur in the Biffle accident? Both aircraft experienced what appears to be the same initiating event, an unsecured baggage door opening and causing engine damage. Both crews recognized the emergency and attempted to return. Both aircraft were capable of flying on one engine. So why did one crew survive and the other didn't? The answer lies in margins. The Barranquilla crew had margins of time, altitude, experience, and crew capability. The Biffle flight apparently did not. Let's talk about those margins, starting with altitude. The Barranquilla incident occurred at a major international airport at sea level in good weather conditions. The crew had climbed to several thousand feet before the door opened and the engine failed. That altitude provided time to diagnose the problem, time to run checklists, time to coordinate with air traffic control, time to set up a proper approach and landing. When you're at 5,000 feet with a failed engine, you have perhaps 10 to 15 minutes of flight time remaining before you must be on the ground. That's enough time to work the problem methodically. The Biffle flight departed from a small airport in rolling terrain. Cloud ceilings were at 1,200 feet. If they were operating VFR, remaining clear of clouds, they probably leveled off at or below 2,000 feet. When the emergency occurred, they may have had only 1,000 to 1,500 feet of altitude. And at that height, with a failed engine, you have perhaps 2 to 3 minutes before you must be on a runway. That's not enough time to work through checklists methodically. That's barely enough time to turn around and line up with a runway. Every second is critical, and there's almost no margin for error. Next, let's talk about experience and crew capability. In the Barranquilla incident, we can reasonably assume the crew consisted of 2 professional pilots, both type-rated in the citation, both experienced, both current and proficient. When the emergency occurred, the pilot flying could focus entirely on flying the aircraft, maintaining airspeed, managing the asymmetric thrust, navigating back to the airport. The pilot not flying could focus entirely on systems management, running the engine failure checklist, shutting down the damaged engine, communicating with ATC, setting up the approach. This division of labor, this crew resource management, is fundamental to how multi-crew aircraft are designed to operate. The assumption is that you have 2 competent pilots who can work together as a team, each handling their respective duties, cross-checking each other, catching errors, managing the workload together. When that system works as designed, even serious emergencies like engine failures are manageable. But what if that assumption doesn't hold? What if you don't actually have two competent, experienced pilots working as a crew? What if the person in the right seat is barely qualified to be there, lacks the training and experience to provide meaningful assistance, doesn't know the systems well enough to run checklists, can't help with decision making because they've never faced a situation like this before? Then the pilot in command is essentially flying solo, trying to do the job of two pilots simultaneously while managing an emergency at low altitude with very little time. That's when survivable emergencies become fatal accidents. We know there were three people on board the Biffle flight. All three were certificated pilots, but only one held a citation type rating. That was Dennis Dutton, age 67, a retired Delta Air Lines captain with decades of professional flying experience. By every measure, Dennis was a highly qualified, highly competent pilot. Under normal circumstances, with a properly qualified crew, he would have been entirely capable of handling an engine failure emergency. The other two occupants were Dennis's son, Jack Dutton, age 21, a junior at Auburn University in a professional flight program, and Greg Biffle, age 54, the NASCAR driver and aircraft owner. Jack held a private pilot certificate for single-engine aircraft with a recently obtained instrument rating. According to FAA records, he did not hold a multi-engine rating. That means he was not legally qualified to act as pilot in command or required crew member on any multi-engine aircraft, let alone a jet. Greg Biffle did hold a multi-engine rating, according to public records. Under Part 91 regulations, he could have served as second in command if he met certain familiarization requirements, specific knowledge of citation systems and procedures, a certain number of takeoffs and landings in type. But we don't know his actual experience level in the citation. We don't know if he had completed formal training. We don't know if he was truly proficient or just technically qualified on paper. Here's the uncomfortable question that the NTSB already knows the answer to, but the public doesn't yet. Who was sitting in that right seat? If it was Jack Dutton, despite his lack of multi-engine qualifications, then the operation was not in compliance with regulations, and more importantly, Dennis Dutton was flying without meaningful crew assistance. If it was Greg Biffle, we need to know his actual proficiency level. Was he truly capable of serving as an effective crew member in an emergency, or was he just occupying a seat? This matters tremendously because of workload. Let me walk you through what has to happen in the cockpit when you experience an engine failure shortly after takeoff. The moment the engine fails, you get multiple indications. There's a sudden yaw as asymmetric thrust develops. Master warning lights illuminate, oral warnings sound. Engine instruments show the failure. If it was caused by foreign object ingestion, there may have been loud banging noises, visible damage, possibly fire warnings. The pilot flying must immediately take several actions. Apply rudder to counteract the yaw and keep the aircraft straight. Lower the nose slightly to maintain airspeed, because if airspeed decays below minimum control speed, you will lose directional control and likely enter an unrecoverable situation. Verify which engine has failed by cross-checking instruments. Make a decision about whether to continue the takeoff and climb away or immediately return to land. Simultaneously, the pilot not flying must identify the failed engine, call out the failure, begin the memory items from the engine failure checklist, which typically include throttling back the failed engine, verifying the failure, preparing to secure the engine. Then they must pull out the actual written checklist and begin executing the full engine shutdown procedure, which involves dozens of steps. Close the fuel valve, turn off igniters, turn off bleed air, discharge fire bottles if there's a fire indication, reconfigure electrical and hydraulic systems to account for the loss of engine-driven generators and pumps. All of this has to happen while the pilot flying is hand-flying the aircraft with asymmetric thrust, probably an IMC or marginal VMC at low altitude, maneuvering back toward the airport. It's an incredibly high workload situation, even for two experienced professional pilots. For one pilot trying to do everything alone, it's nearly impossible, especially if that pilot is also dealing with the distraction and chaos of an open baggage door, wind noise, items flying around, uncertainty about what's actually happening. There's another factor we need to discuss, and it's one that investigators will examine very carefully: decision-making under stress. When an emergency occurs shortly after takeoff, you face an immediate decision. Do you continue the takeoff, climb away, get some altitude and some breathing room, then turn around and come back? Or do you immediately maneuver to return to the runway, accepting that you'll be low and slow and maneuvering aggressively? There's no single right answer. It depends on many factors. How much runway is behind you? How much altitude do you have? What's the weather? What's the terrain? What's your single engine performance at your current weight? Both choices have risks. If you continue straight ahead and climb, you're flying away from the airport and you'll need more time to turn around and get back. And if you turn around immediately, you're maneuvering at low altitude and low airspeed, which increases the risk of a stall or loss of control. The standard guidance for light twins is that if you're below a certain altitude, usually around 400 to 500 feet, when the engine fails, you should land straight ahead, or with only slight maneuvering, don't try to turn back. You don't have enough altitude. But in a jet with better performance, that calculus changes. Jets can climb faster, turn tighter, have better single engine capability. A turn back to the runway may be survivable in a jet where it wouldn't be in a light piston twin. But that decision requires knowledge, experience, and judgment. You need to know your aircraft's performance. You need to accurately assess your current situation. You need to account for weather, terrain, obstacles, and you need to make the decision quickly and commit to it. Second guessing, changing your mind mid-maneuver, that's when accidents happen. From the limited tracking data available, it appears the Biffle flight initially climbed to around 2,000 feet, then leveled off and began descending while maneuvering back toward the airport. That suggests they made a decision to return, they committed to it, and they were executing that plan. So what went wrong? Why didn't they make it? The aircraft impacted terrain approximately 1,800 feet short of runway 28. They were close, they were lined up, they were on approach, but they were also low, too low, and they ran out of altitude before reaching the runway. The question is why? Was it a misjudgment of their altitude or descent rate? Was it loss of additional power, perhaps the remaining engine developing problems or being inadvertently shut down? Was it an aerodynamic stall due to flying too slowly while maneuvering? Was it spatial disorientation in the low clouds and poor visibility? We don't know yet, but we can make some educated assessments based on what typically goes wrong in situations like this. One of the most common factors in engine failure accidents is mismanagement of airspeed. When you lose an engine, you lose thrust, and your natural instinct is to pull back on the controls to try to maintain altitude. But if you pull back too much, if you slow down too much, you'll stall. And if you stall at low altitude during a turn, the aircraft will likely enter a spin and you won't have altitude to recover. Every aircraft has a minimum control speed for single engine operations called VMC. Below this speed, you cannot maintain directional control with maximum rudder deflection. If you slow below VMC with one engine out, the aircraft will yaw uncontrollably toward the dead engine, likely rolling inverted. For the Citation 2, VMC is around 95 knots depending on configuration. The normal approach speed is around 110 to 120 knots. That gives you a margin of only 15 to 25 knots between normal approach speed and loss of control. If the crew was low on altitude trying to stretch their glide to reach the runway, they may have been tempted to slow down, to raise the nose, to trade airspeed for altitude. But if they slowed too much, if they got near or below VMC while turning, they would have lost control. The aircraft would have rolled, yawed, and entered an unrecoverable descent. At low altitude, there would have been no time to recover. This is pure speculation, but it's a scenario that has played out in many previous accidents with similar circumstances. Another possibility is fixation and distraction. If the crew was dealing with an open baggage door, with wind noise, with items flying around the cabin, with uncertainty about the extent of the damage, they may have become distracted from the primary task of flying the aircraft. There's a famous accident investigation principle called fly the aircraft first. It means that no matter what else is going wrong, no matter what warnings are going off, no matter what failures you're experiencing, your first priority is to maintain control of the aircraft, maintain airspeed, maintain altitude, avoid terrain and obstacles. But when you're in a high-stress emergency situation, especially if you're task saturated and overloaded, it's very easy to lose sight of that priority. You start focusing on troubleshooting the problem, on running checklists, on figuring out what's wrong, and you stop paying attention to basic flight parameters. Airspeed starts decaying, altitude starts decreasing, bank angle starts increasing, and by the time you recognize what's happening, it's too late to correct. This is exactly why two-pilot crews are so important, why crew resource management training emphasizes cross-checking and calling out deviations, why the pilot not flying is supposed to monitor instruments and announce airspeed or altitude if parameters are going out of limits. But if you don't have an experienced pilot in that other seat, if you don't have someone who knows what to look for and isn't afraid to speak up, those protective layers don't exist. Let's talk about a piece of evidence that's been circulating and causing considerable discussion. An audio recording appeared online several days after the crash, purportedly containing radio transmissions from the accident flight. The provenance of this audio is unclear. Nobody knows who recorded it or where it came from. There's no verified chain of custody. However, technical analysis by audio experts suggests it's consistent with actual VHF aviation radio communications, not a fabrication or studio recreation. In this audio, a male voice that sounds relatively young makes transmissions indicating there's an issue with the aircraft and mentioning getting the landing gear down. The tone is clearly urgent, clearly an emergency situation, though the specific word Mayday is not used. What's notable to many observers is that the voice sounds young, not like a 67-year-old retired airline captain. If this audio is authentic, and that's still a significant if, it could suggest that either Jack Dutton or Greg Biffle was making radio calls, which would tell us something about crew positions and responsibilities. The NTSB has been conspicuously evasive about this audio in their public statements. In the first press briefing, spokesperson Michael Graham stated, they had no knowledge of an emergency declaration by the crew. In the second briefing, he clarified that a text message had been sent by someone on board indicating an emergency landing, but he conspicuously did not mention any radio transmissions. When asked directly about audio, he deflected. This evasiveness is unusual and suggests the NTSB is deliberately avoiding discussing what the cockpit voice recorder captured until they're ready to release official findings. And that brings us to another critical piece of evidence that will ultimately answer many of our questions. This aircraft, despite being operated under Part 91, where cockpit voice recorders are not required, had a CVR installed from its previous life as a Part 1 35 charter aircraft. That recorder captured everything that happened in that cockpit. Every word spoken, every warning that sounded, every control input, every switch position. The NTSB already knows exactly what happened. They know who was flying. They know who was in which seat. They know what failures occurred. They know what decisions were made. They know what the crew was dealing with in those final moments. The preliminary report, expected within the next couple of weeks, will reveal at least some of that information. It will tell us crew positions and qualifications. It will describe the sequence of events based on CVR and flight data. It will report findings from the engine teardowns, which will definitively determine whether the right engine was damaged by foreign object ingestion or by impact forces. It will tell us whether the baggage door was found and if so, what condition it was in. But even the preliminary report won't answer everything. The full final report with complete analysis and probable cause determination typically takes 12 to 18 months. What we can say now, based on the evidence available, is that this accident appears to represent a convergence of multiple factors, each of which alone would not have been fatal, but which together created a situation from which there was no escape. A possible unsecured baggage door, a design flaw that provides no warning to the crew, possible foreign object ingestion into an engine, causing catastrophic engine failure, marginal weather conditions reducing visibility and options, low altitude at the time of the emergency, providing minimal time to respond, possibly inadequate crew capability with one pilot trying to manage a two-pilot workload, possible decision-making errors or misjudgments under extreme stress and time pressure. This is the classic Swiss cheese model of accident causation. Multiple layers of defense, each with holes, and on this particular flight, all the holes aligned. The baggage door wasn't secured, the door latch design had no backup warning system, the engine ingested debris and failed. The weather was marginal, the altitude was low, the crew capability may have been inadequate. And when all those factors combined, the outcome was sealed. The title of this video asks why one engine failure sealed this flight's fate. The answer is that it wasn't really the engine failure alone. Modern twin-engine jets are designed to survive engine failures. Pilots are trained to handle them. Regulatory standards require demonstrated single-engine capability. In normal circumstances, with adequate altitude, adequate crew capability, and adequate decision making, an engine failure on a Citation 2 should be a survivable emergency, perhaps even a routine one for highly experienced crews. But circumstances were not normal. Every margin that should have been there, altitude margin, time margin, crew capability margin, weather margin, every one of those protective buffers appears to have been reduced or absent. And when an emergency occurs with no margins remaining, when there's no room for any error, no time to troubleshoot, no backup if the first approach doesn't work, that's when survivable emergencies become fatal accidents. Greg Biffle spent his career managing risk at high speeds. In NASCAR, risk management is everything. You push the limits, but you know where those limits are. You take calculated risks, but you have safety equipment, safety crews, runoff areas, crash barriers. You prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. The irony of his death in an aviation accident is that aviation requires exactly the same mindset, that same respect for risk, that same level of preparation. But in aviation, the margins are different, the consequences of errors are different, and the safety nets are fewer. A single engine failure should not crash a twin engine jet. But when that single failure occurs at the worst possible moment, when it's compounded by other factors, when the crew doesn't have the time or the capability or the margins to manage it successfully, it can and does. That's the harsh lesson of this accident. That's why one engine failure sealed this flight's fate. Not because the failure itself was unsurvivable, but because every other factor that should have created a safety margin was absent. The investigation continues, more will be revealed. We'll learn the definitive answers to the questions we're asking now. But the fundamental lesson is already clear. In aviation, margins matter, preparation matters, crew capability matters, respect for standard procedures and regulatory requirements matters. And when you compromise those margins, when you cut corners, when you operate at the edge of limits rather than well within them, you're setting yourself up for a situation where one unexpected failure, one thing going wrong at the wrong moment, can have fatal consequences. That's the reality of aviation. That's what sealed this flight's fate. And that's what we must remember and learn from so that future flights don't end the same way. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. And most importantly, fly safe.